America produces the most oil in the world. So why doesn't its hunger ever end? In the darkness of night, the pumps in the oil fields of Texas are still moving up and down. Pipelines are running, storage tanks are full, crude is flowing out of shale fields, and on paper, America is the biggest oil producer in the world. But at that very moment, the price boards at gas stations in New York, California, and the Midwest are climbing. Truckers are holding their heads after seeing diesel prices, airlines are counting their fuel bills, and households are wondering, if America itself produces the most oil, then why is its pocket still burning because of a war in the Middle East? The question is simple, but the answer is deeply uncomfortable. Because oil is not just something that comes out of the ground, it is a global system. And in this system, even the most powerful producer cannot escape every shock. According to recent Reuters and EIA reporting, by the third week of the US-Iran war, the Strait of Hormuz had been badly affected. Brent had gone above $100, crude had crossed $120 in intraday spikes, and US gasoline prices had surged sharply. First, it is important to understand why Hormuz is such a big issue. According to the US Energy Information Administration, around 20 million barrels per day of oil flowed through the Strait of Hormuz in 2024, which was roughly 1/5 of the world's total petroleum liquids consumption. This is the choke point through which crude and LNG from Gulf producers reach the global market. When war, mines, attacks, or naval uncertainty take over this route, the world's supply chain tightens. Reuters wrote on March 17, 2026, that this route remained largely closed, tankers were stuck, and the market felt that a major part of global supply was at risk. So the question is not how much oil America directly takes from the Middle East. The question is that the nerve center of global oil pricing has been shaken. Now look at the other side. America really is the largest crude oil producer in the world. According to the EIA's short-term energy outlook, US crude oil production is expected to average 13.6 million barrels per day in 2026. That is the number that placed America above traditional giants like Saudi Arabia and Russia. Over the last decade and a half, the shale revolution changed the American energy map itself. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing turned places like Texas, New Mexico, and North Dakota into oil powerhouses. That is why, from the outside, the illusion forms that if America produces so much, why should it care about the rest of the world's supply? But the real story begins not with production volume, but with production quality and refining structure. And that is the biggest twist in this entire puzzle. A very large share of the oil America produces is light, sweet crude. The EIA has clearly written that a large part of US production growth has come from relatively light crude, especially from shale and tight formations. On the other hand, the US refining complex has, for decades, been built in a way that it can efficiently process heavier, more sour crude. According to the EIA's 2022 analysis, America still imports crude because its refining needs and domestic crude quality do not fully match each other. In simple language, America has a lot of oil, but that oil is not always the exact kind its refineries are used to. That is why oil-rich America still imports, still exports, and still cannot escape a war shock. In other words, America's energy story is not a story of whether it has oil or not. It is a story of what kind of oil it has. This is why both statements are true at the same time. America produces the most, and America still has to bring oil in. America's hunger is not just about barrels, but about the right barrels. Light crude may be useful for gasoline blend stocks, but large complex refineries, especially on the Gulf Coast, have historically been optimized for heavy and sour barrels. Heavy crude can also be cheaper, and refineries have already invested heavily in specialized equipment to convert it into diesel, jet fuel, petrochemical feedstocks, and other refined products. So when domestic production booms toward light crude, the market naturally begins exporting it, while refineries continue importing heavy crude. That is exactly why America produces the most oil and America still brings oil in can both be true at the same time. Now look at the import and export numbers because this is where the whole picture becomes clear. According to EIA data, in 2025 the United States imported on average around 6 million barrels per day of crude oil. According to that same EIA table, imports from Saudi Arabia in 2025 were around 269,000 barrels per day, while Canada remained the biggest source. On the other hand, US crude exports are also huge. In recent years, America has remained a net petroleum exporter, and the EIA's explanatory material says that after crude export restrictions were lifted in 2015, exports rose rapidly. That means America simultaneously imports and exports both, because it is not just a consumer in the global oil system, but also a trader and supplier. Canada's role here is the biggest. According to the EIA, in 2023, US crude imports from Canada averaged 3.9 million barrels per day, and Canada made up around 60% of US crude imports. The same pattern can be seen in later data tables too, where Canada remains the top supplier. This means America's refineries are deeply dependent on Canadian heavy crude. So if someone asks only, why doesn't America just use its own oil? The answer is that refinery systems do not switch instantly. Refineries are multi-billion-dollar infrastructures. They do not update overnight like a mobile app. Decades-old hardware, feedstock design, pipeline connections, refinery yield economics, and regional logistics together decide what crude will be refined where and how. Now understand the global market logic that is pushing prices upward during this war. Oil prices are not determined only by how many physical barrels America is getting. Prices are also shaped by global benchmark expectations, future scarcity, shipping risk, insurance costs, refinery outages, diesel shortages, and speculative positioning. Reuters wrote on March 16th that Bank of America and Standard Chartered had raised their 2026 oil forecasts because of the Hormuz disruption. Other Reuters reports mentioned sharp moves in Brent and WTI, settlements above $100, and intraday spikes. When the market feels that millions of barrels per day are at risk, then even oil produced in America suddenly becomes more expensive because its opportunity cost is tied to the global market. Why would an American producer sell cheaply when the world price is higher? That is the capitalism that does not let domestic abundance turn into a guarantee of cheap fuel. That is why pump prices in America rise, even if the crude is coming out of domestic fields. Reuters reported on March 11, 2026, that the US national average gasoline price had reached $3.58 per gallon, which was a jump of nearly 60 cents in just 11 days. By March 16th, Reuters reported gasoline at $3.76 per gallon and diesel above $5 per gallon. In the same period, Reuters also wrote that gasoline prices had risen more than 70 cents per gallon since the conflict began. Now think about it. This effect is not only because of imported Saudi crude, but because crude, refining margins, and fuel markets are globally linked. If Asian refineries are cutting output because of the Hormuz blockage, then the global tightness in diesel and jet fuel will affect America's product market too. There is another very important aspect of this story: refined products. Many people think crude oil and gasoline are the same thing, when in reality refineries convert crude into different products. Gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, heating oil, petrochemical feedstocks, and much more. Reuters wrote on March 16th that because Middle East exports were crippled, 10 to 20% of seaborne diesel supply had been affected, and diesel prices in the US crossed $5 per gallon. This means that sometimes the shock is felt not more sharply in crude, but in products. Even if crude can somehow be found, refining bottlenecks and product shortages keep prices high. That is why America's huge oil production does not give immediate relief to the consumer, because the consumer buys refined product, not raw crude. Now, a major question. If America produces so much, why can't it fill the entire Gulf vacuum? Both EIA and Reuters reporting show that high prices do boost US production, but they do not create an instant miracle. It takes time to drill wells, increase completion activity, mobilize crews, and expand pipelines, storage, and service capacity. The EIA has raised its 2026 output forecast, but the same EIA also says Brent may remain above $95 for the next 2 months before easing gradually. That means the market understands that US shale is responsive, but not instant. If Hormuz shuts down and millions of barrels per day disappear from the Gulf, the Permian Basin cannot magically ride out next week and save the world. Trade, freight, and logistics also play a major role during wartime. If accessible barrels in the world market fall, tankers get rerouted, insurance premiums jump, and shipping bottlenecks form, then even the delivered cost of non-Middle East oil goes up. Reuters' March 17th report said that because of the Fujairah fire and Hormuz closure, UAE production too was cut by more than half, and Middle Eastern crude became the most expensive. In such an environment, the value of Atlantic Basin cargoes, Russian barrels, and Canadian supply all changes. In other words, America's own oil is priced not just by domestic economics, but by shifting global arbitrage. That is why the shadow of global war appears on the local pump price. This story also has a political angle. In America, fuel prices are not just an economic issue, but an electoral issue too. Reuters repeatedly wrote that rising gasoline and diesel prices had become a headache for the Trump administration and for midterm politics. When gasoline rises 20 to 25% in 2 weeks, it affects household budgets, freight costs, food inflation, and consumer confidence. Pressure rises on the Fed, inflation expectations are disturbed, and recession fears grow louder. In Reuters' March 16th Fed-related report, it was said that gasoline prices had risen as much as 25% in 2 weeks, and the dilemma of inflation versus slowdown had returned for policymakers. That is also where recession fear comes from. An oil shock does not just raise the energy bill, it can slow the entire economy. Transport becomes more expensive, airlines raise ticket prices, freight becomes costlier, manufacturing input costs rise, farmers and logistics firms come under pressure, and consumer discretionary spending falls. Reuters wrote in its global market themes coverage that oil above $100 had made policy harder for central banks. If energy inflation remains stubborn, borrowing costs may stay higher for longer, and both growth and jobs can be affected. So America's oil hunger is not just hunger for physical barrels, but also hunger for stable prices. And that hunger is not satisfied by domestic production alone. It should also be understood that America's hunger is not just for volume, but for flexibility. It needs different grades of crude, different supply patterns for different regions. And it needs a refining system that better matches the changing production mix. In this context, Reuters quoted refinery owner 𝐮𝐸𝐿 on March 11th as saying that the crisis had highlighted the need for more investment in US production and refining, but that the economics of new refineries are difficult. Refineries are not cheap, environmental approvals are tough, and global competition, especially from newer mega refineries, is intense. So the solution of just build a new refinery and fix the problem is not practically that easy. That means America is an energy superpower, but not an energy island. It produces a lot, exports a lot, has been a net petroleum exporter, but it still cannot separate itself from the global oil market. Its producers look at world prices, its refineries are built for specific grades, its consumers buy refined products, and its economy is deeply affected by freight and fuel costs. That is why when war breaks out at a choke point like Hormuz, America remains economically exposed even while being physically abundant. That is exactly why both questions can be true at the same time. We produce the most, and then why are we still suffering? And perhaps that is the biggest lesson of this story. Being the world's biggest economy, being the biggest oil producer, being the architect of the shale revolution, none of these things fully protect you from a global commodity shock. Because oil is not just a national resource, it is an international bloodstream. America has wells, rigs, reserves, pipelines, exports. But the market still asks it, what is the quality of your barrels? What are your refineries built for? What fuel are your consumers dependent on? And what is happening in the rest of the world? As long as the answers to those questions remain global, America's oil hunger will remain global too. That is why even the country that extracts the most oil in the world will remain tied to war, choke points, freight risk, refinery mismatch, and global pricing. That is both its strength and its greatest weakness.
If our video has taught you something new, do not forget to like and share this video so that this information can reach others as well. Your likes and shares are a source of inspiration for us. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let us know in the comments. It will be our honor to answer your questions and listen to suggestion. And yes, if you like our content, subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so that you stay connected with every new story. Thank you. GRT Business YouTube channel sources, news from various news agencies, opinion polls and other public sources. We try to ensure that every report and summary is accurate and verified, but we are not responsible for any dispute or error. Our aim is only to provide you with accurate information.